Plato's conception of morality, again, relies upon the parts of the soul. Now, he thinks that each part of the soul has a function. That in order to be a, how shall we say, a good part of the soul, it's got to stick within its limits. Now, we already have a conception of this in our culture. We usually call it health. Health has limits. Your blood pressure can't be too high, your blood pressure can't be too low, your food intake can't be too high, your food intake can't be too low. Kind of the same thing with even the amount of exercise you do. It is possible to have too much exercise. Now those activities or habits that keep you within that proper function, keep you within the right limits, those are called virtues. So each part of the soul has a virtue. And to understand what that virtue is, you have to know what that part of the soul is for. You have to know what it's good for. It's like this fountain behind me. Each part of it must be set within limits. The water pressure can't be too low, otherwise it won't come out of the tube, or might not make a big enough splash, or it won't have enough of an arc to be pleasing. The water level can't be too low. Similar reasons. Even how the fountain is formed, having the lines receding in the back, being long, that's a limit. Right? You can't design the fountain just to be any way you want, otherwise it won't be a nice fountain anymore. People won't enjoy it. The fountain has a certain function. It's to be pleasing. You don't necessarily drink from this fountain. That's not what it's for. It's not like the water fountains at school. It's meant to be scenery, to be enjoyed. But to be enjoyed, it has to be set within certain limits. And those practices which keep the fountain in those limits, that's called a virtue. For a memory mentioned image of virtue, I like to use the furry rabbit chewing on a carrot. The rabbit is furry and it's chewing. It's a fur chew. Fur chew for virtue. It's an important part of Plato's conception of the soul that each part is necessary. Even appetite. Right now I'm standing in front of a very barren wall. There is no appetite here. There is no bodily desires. It's dry, it's flat, it's cold, it's dead. Well, that's what happens when you don't have enough appetite. You have death. Now, it's not to say you can't have an excess of appetite. Sure. Oh, absolutely you can. You can indulge the body too much. Donuts and chocolate and beer and wine are some of my particular vices as far as that's concerned. Can't have any of those anymore, by the way. But yeah, there definitely are excesses and deficits of appetite. Now, just to reiterate, virtues are those things which are good for the soul, and that's going to be determined by the function of that part, or even the relationship of the parts. So the virtue of appetite is temperance. Knowing, indulging in appetite too much, that's an excess, and not indulging in appetite enough is a deficit. What's the phrase? All work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy. Kind of what's happening there. So we got temperance. Temperance is what is the virtue of appetite. It's indulging in appetite enough for a proper function of the soul, and not going overboard or not enough. For a memory mentioned image of temperance, I like to think of angry ants. Right? Angry ants have a temper. Temper ants for temperance. Spirit. Spirit's a little different, but it's actually something you're really familiar with, although you probably don't call it spirit very often. Spirit is this drive, it's motivation. This waterfall might actually be a good analogy for spirit. There's a certain degree to which this waterfall must go forward, must flow, to function well as a waterfall. You put too much water through there, and it's going to spray everywhere. It's going to be roaring. It's not going to hit the pool. It's going to hit everything else, or it's hit at least the pool. It'll hit everything else as well. If the water is too strong, it might even collapse that structure altogether. On the other hand, you can't have too little of the flow. It would be just a trickle. You wouldn't hardly see anything at all. You have to have just right amount. And there might be a range, but you have to have a good amount going through there in order to function well. Well, this is kind of the same thing with spirit. If you have all drive all the time, well, you're probably going to get exhausted. If you don't have any drive at all, you're not going to get anything done. Spirit is also really kind of talked about with reference to bravery. Right? Courage is the virtue of spirit. If you don't have enough courage, you're not going to want to do anything. You'll be afraid, and you won't actually live life at all. But there is such a thing as being too brave. Right? We call it being foolhardy, or berserker is one way of describing it. And somebody who's too brave goes at everything all the time with full zeal. Well, you just can't do that. Right? First of all, it's just simply impossible to do everything to a full degree. You don't have enough energy or time for that matter. So courage is this proper application of spirit. It's where you're not just sitting on the sidelines all the time, and it's not where you're trying to play the game all the time either. You have to learn which is going to be the proper amount, the proper function to be a full person, to be a living person. Now, reason is the part of the soul that knows. There's a couple different ways of talking about this. One thing that reason can know is how the world works. We can understand cause and effect. We can also understand essences, universals for Plato. Well, in addition to knowing cause and effect, we also know, or we come up with, goals. These are things to achieve. These are purposes. Now, reason, the goals are different than cause and effect, right? Through cause and effect, we can know, for instance, through exercise, right? Through cause and effect, we know that a certain combination of foods like potato chips, French fries, starchy sugars and alcohol, starches, sugars, and alcohol, things like this, and a lack of exercise will produce a body that has a high blood pressure, high percentage of fat in the body, and low energy levels. Now, in contrast, through exercise and a proper combination of foods like vegetables and low-fat proteins, low cholesterol proteins, we know that the blood pressure will be lower, that energy levels will be up, and fat levels will be lower in the body. Now, that's cause and effect. The other thing that reason does is says, by the way, the second one, where there's lower fat, where there's lower blood pressure and higher energy, that's the goal. Right? That's the goal. Now, reason helps discern the goals. So which goals are going to be relevant? Well, it's those goals that produce happiness. Again, we have that word. Now, happiness is not just simply laughter. It's not just simply fun. It's not just simply, going crazy on a Friday night, although it doesn't necessarily rule it out. But happiness is this satisfaction. It's fulfillment. It's, being the most you can be. Well, that's what reason figures out. Now, reason, reason has a virtue as well. Right? The virtue of reason is wisdom. Now, an excess of reason would be maybe, trying to know everything that's to be known, but is ultimately trivial. Right? Lots of people memorize otherwise useless facts. Not philosophers, of course. Philosophers never memorize useless facts. We know every relevant and useful thing, and only relevant to useful things. On the other hand, there could be a deficit of reason, right? Not knowing anything, not trying to know anything. That's pretty bad too. So the virtue of reason is wisdom. It's where you get it just right, where you know what's relevant for happiness. For a memory mansion image of wisdom, I like to think of that wise old man, the stereotypical wise old man sitting on top of a mountain.